what is happening with Peckford's lawsuit and at the Ambassador Bridge and at Coots and in Ottawa is critical, in part because it seems shocking to the legacy media and the would-be elites, the elites and the would-be elites, because they can't imagine that the lower classes would ever rise up. And this is the argument, that this is actually effectively a class war. And it does remind me of Occupy, right? It does in many ways, that this is effectively the people who don't have the power to write the scripts at the moment, but who are actually making the democracy run, saying, finally, fuck this. I am not putting up with this anymore. We have lost too much. We have lost human beings. We have lost loved ones. We have lost economies. We have lost our jobs. We have lost our stores. We have lost our businesses. We have lost our friends. We have lost our agency, our ability to travel. We have lost too much. We are done. And frankly, the so-called knowledge workers, who have lost far less, by and large, far less, because they can afford to have the people who are actually doing the real physical work of the world bring all their stuff in and assume that the supply chains will just keep functioning because I'm sure there are people there doing that. Fundamentally, neither understand nor respect the work that people who don't look like them do. Okay? So I wanted to read just a little bit from this, David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs, which I finished. And I will say, by way of sort of disclaimer, I think the numbers that I gave to you were, I find about 75% of what he thinks and writes extraordinary and deep and just pointed and accurate. And there's a solid quarter, maybe it's less than that, but that I just completely disagree with.
So I will just say, I actually assigned his essay Bullshit Jobs to my class,
which was the basis for this book. Yep.
And I think it is insightful.
Mm-hmm.
I then encountered his understanding of adaptive evolution, and it was appallingly off.
Yeah, and it's clear even in this book. He doesn't speak about it directly, but it's clear that there's some misunderstandings. That's fine. That is not relevant here. I just, especially when I bring up books and I say, oh, I really recommend this. Like, I really recommend a lot of the thinking here, and especially the reveal that I'm not going to go into here, although I may later, of, and when his description of bullshit jobs, I don't remember what it is. It's different from what he calls shit jobs, what everyone knows as shit jobs, where you're doing real work that needs to be done, but you're not being paid well enough and you're not being honored well enough for the work, right?
Yep.
Bullshit jobs are jobs that shouldn't exist at all. And they tend to pay better. They tend to be white collar, middle class or upper middle class or upper class jobs. And often no one, including the person doing them, can figure out why they exist at all. But they're dependent on them for a paycheck and healthcare and all of this. That all is not exactly what I want to do here, though. I want to read just a section from near the end. Oh, he's talking about the turn of the last century, which is now, that's not actually how you would say it anymore. It's sort of the robber baron era in as the Industrial Revolution was ramping up, and the so-called capitalists were really taking over and monopolizing sectors and beginning to create the heavily tiered society that we have now. So from that point forward, for the next century or so, labor organizing tended to focus on factory workers, partly simply because they were the easiest to organize, which led to the situation we have now, where simply invoking the term working class instantly draws up images of men in overalls toiling on production lines. And it's common to hear otherwise intelligent middle-class intellectuals suggest that, with the decline of factory work, the working class in, say, Britain or America no longer exists, as if it were actually ingeniously constructed androids that were driving their buses, trimming their hedges, installing their cables, or changing their grandparents' bedpans. In fact, there was never a time that most workers worked in factories. Even in the days of Karl Marx or Charles Dickens, working-class neighborhoods housed far more maids, bootblacks, dustmen, cooks, nurses, cabbies, schoolteachers, prostitutes, caretakers, and costermongers, I don't know what that is, than employees in coal mines, textile mills, or iron foundries. Are these former jobs productive? In what sense and for whom? Who produces a souffle? It is because of these ambiguities that such issues are typically brushed aside when people are arguing about value. But doing so blinds us to the reality that most working class labor actually much more resembles what we archetypically think of as women's work, regardless of who's doing it, being looking after people, seeing to their wants and needs, explaining, reassuring, anticipating what the boss wants or is thinking, not to mention caring for, monitoring, and maintaining plants, animals, machines, and other objects that it involves hammering, carving, hoisting, or harvesting things. This blindness has consequences, so this is the point here. Let me give an illustration. In 2014, there was a transit strike when London's mayor threatened to close perhaps 100 London Underground ticket offices, leaving only machines. This sparked an online debate among certain local Marxists about whether the workers threatened with redundancy had bullshit jobs. The logic put forward by some being that either a job produced value for capitalism, which the capitalists clearly no longer thought these jobs did, or else it served a social function that would be necessary even if capitalism did not exist, which clearly these did not, since under full communism, transport would be free. Needless to say, I was drawn in. Asked to respond, I eventually referred my interlocutors to a circular put out by the strikers themselves, called Advice to Passengers Using the Future London Underground. It included lines like these. So again, this is the language of the people who are striking during the London Underground's closure in 2014, transit strike. Please ensure you are thoroughly familiar with London Underground's 11 lines and 270 stations before traveling. Please ensure that there are no delays in your journey or any accidents, emergencies, incidents, or evacuations. Please do not be disabled, or poor, or new to London. Please avoid being too young or too old. Please do not be harassed or assaulted while traveling. Please do not lose your property or your children. Please do not require assistance in any way. Graeber continues, it apparently never having occurred to many advocates of proletarian revolution to investigate what it is that transit workers actually did. This is so important. So if we can go back to what we were talking about last week, comparing what is happening right now, which is an actual, honest, grassroots, massive protest in many places in Canada that includes real people who are saying, enough, I will not comply, and this must stop. This is anti-constitutional and anti-human. Compare that to the mostly middle-class led protests of the summer and fall of 2020, which had these fictitious fantasy-like views of what it was that most people in the so-called lower classes were living like, and were speaking on their behalf because what? They didn't believe that these people could speak for themselves. So here we have right now people actually speaking for themselves, showing up, and as I've said before, God, I wish I could be there. And of course we can't because we can't cross the border. But showing up, and every word that I am hearing, and I will actually be hopefully publishing a few more words from people who are actually there and seeing it in natural selections this week. Everything I am hearing is how much love there is, how much gratitude, how much joy at being able to interact with people again and being able to see that people will stand up for their rights, for their freedoms, for their humanity. And what is the response from the media that glorified an actually violent set of protests that reliably turned into riots, at least here in Portland in 2020? They are slandering these people and this movement and claiming that this is an insurrection against democracy when it is exactly the opposite.
Right. And it is not independent of what we were just talking about because, of course,
it's not.
These very properties, the media and the tech platforms, are being invited, in fact, strong-armed into participating in this slandering. And the point is, it doesn't matter if they're right.
Yeah.
Right? Because malinformation is what it is.